For me, the creativity is where you are inventive and think of new ways and create new things. And the way I use the word art is everything that is not functional. So everything you don't have to do, everything that it takes place in the area of life that you might call fictional, that doesn't have an impact that you can't escape. So a movie can have a huge impact on you, but you can always leave. A song can have a massive impact on you, but you can turn it off. So art can have a big impact, but it's not like a bomb in a sense that it's inescapable.
Welcome to The Creative Asylum, a weekly podcast that digs deep into the minds of visionary creators of all stripes. Musicians, actors, filmmakers, writers, artists, cartoonists, and cultural disruptors. Here, we'll discuss perspectives of living life on your own terms. Life lessons that keep us grounded, insane, and sometimes pull us back from the edge. So, take a deep breath, loosen your grip on the bland and the boring. This is your weekly prescription for authentic living, creative clarity, and hopefully, a little bit of cultural rebellion.
Side effects may include spontaneous joy, existential epiphanies, and an uncontrollable urge to do weird and beautiful things.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Creative Asylum. I'm your host, Daniel House, and today's episode is a conversation with Bette Adriaanse. I probably totally mangled her last name. She's better known as just Bette A. She is a novelist, a short story writer, and also a visual artist, and also actually an art teacher. In the last couple of years, she's gotten a bit of notoriety for a couple of collaborations she's done with Brian Eno. The first one is a book called What Art Does, which is basically a series of conversations between Bette and Brian about the meaning of art, the purpose of art, why we do art, questions that we've probably all thought about, but have never really spent that much time talking about. And then from that came a second project. The first one is just a book of hers called Slow Stories, and it is a series of 16 short stories that she wrote over the course of 20 years. Two of those stories became a collaborative music project with Brian Eno. They did this record together called Two Slow Stories, and it's actually her reading a couple of the stories with Eno's trademark ambient soundscape music behind it. This conversation is really exciting for me, not just because I'm kind of an Eno fanboy, but it was really delightful talking to Bette just about art and creativity and, where it fits in our world and perhaps where it should fit in our world. She doesn't like that word, should. I don't either, but sometimes you can talk about an ideal world that consists of visual art, dance, music, writing, all forms of creative output, and what the world would look like if there was more of that. So let's get over to the conversation with Bette A. Bette, hello, how are you?
Hi, I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm great. It's really nice to have you here. Thank you for joining me on the Creative Asylum. I only recently became familiar with your work through the Slow Stories project and then kind of went backwards and found out a lot more about a lot of the work you've done. I probably want to start talking first about the book, What Art Does, and then move forward into Slow Stories, since I think chronologically that's sort of how it worked with you and Brian Eno as well. Yeah?
Yes, that's how it went. So that's perfect for me. And also, thank you for having me on.
Okay. Well, let's start with what art does. And I'm not necessarily interested in the process of how you got together, but I am interested in just the whole notion of exploring that idea about art and creativity and what purpose it has in life. Because that's something I've spent a lot of time thinking about. And it's kind of a lot of what this podcast is really about.
Yes, I think many people think about this question when they do art. There's this question of, so what is it for? Why do we do it? What's the purpose? And I had that question when I was in art school. It first came up when my teacher sometimes said, "This thing that you made, it's not art. It's just creativity, or it's just an illustration, but it's not art." And I objected to that idea, but I couldn't really explain why. I couldn't really explain to my teachers why I thought they were wrong, that there was not a division between high art like operas and paintings and everyday creative stuff like painting your nails or making doodles or singing along to a song in the car. So when I became a teacher, an art school teacher, this question became more urgent because how do you teach something if you can't define it and you don't know what it's for? And when I met Brian, he said that he'd been thinking about this question for decades and lecturing about it. And he didn't just have the question, he also had answers. So that piqued my interest. And we kept on talking about it, and we started recording those conversations and transcribing them. And that's what led to the book.
So the book was more came from conversations between you, not necessarily things that he had written before on the matter, or both.
Well, he had mostly given a lot of lectures about it, and he'd always wanted to write a book about it. When we talked about it, first we started wanting to do it equally, so my ideas and his ideas, but there was 4 or 5 decades of lecturing about this uh,
Right.
on his side, and on my side there was some questions and some thoughts. So we soon settled into a really nice dynamic where I questioned his ideas. I started testing them against each other and really building a fundament that is solid. And that became the foundation of the book. And I started making doodles to illustrate his ideas.
Hmm.
So that's how we did it together. But if you read the book and there's a really good sentence in there where you think this is spot on, that's Brian Eno. He has such a way with words and a way of
Yeah.
explaining things that the ideas are definitely his.
What was the idea that you think that your art teacher had when they said your creativity was not art? What was their sense of what is art and what is not art?
At that time in art school, it had to push the boundary. It had to be avant-garde or edgy or
Okay.
a performance with a dead rabbit in a leaky strip club or something. That would be
Okay.
art.
So you
And
have to approve the content before you can accept it as being art, something
yes,
like that?
exactly.
Mhm.
Exactly. So, and then they put their taste on it as well. So, which in that case in Amsterdam at that time, it was kind of edgy. And everything that was gentle or soft, that was not art. Anything that was, daily creativity, that was not art. And I objected to it because I felt that if I did make things that they approved of as art, if I wrote a dark story, for instance, it was exactly the same activity as when I did those things that they didn't approve of as art. So for me, there was no difference, only in how it was received. So that's how I started thinking about it.
It makes me think of conversations I've had with people over the years where somebody will say something like, "I don't know anything about art." And I'm like, "Well, when you look at something, do you feel something? I mean, do you like it objectively without having to describe why? Do you feel something? Do you like it?" And my feeling has always been that's sort of all you need to know about art is what your sense of it and what your emotional response to something is, because in my mind, on some level, that's sort of the purpose of. I mean, I don't know if you use art and creativity as interchangeable. I think to me, I sort of do, because I think any form of creativity can be considered as art. So you don't have to go to school to understand a certain movement or art history to still consider something art, or to consider something that you're doing creatively as being art or not, you know?
Absolutely. The word creativity also reminds me of when people are creative and they do creative bookkeeping when they want to hide fraud, or they do creative politics when they come up with lies about why they bomb places. So that's where I think I don't see art. That's where I see real world activity and somebody uses their creative brain to do harm. So that's I thought a lot about these definitions, what they are for me. So for me, the creativity is where you are inventive and think of new ways and create new things. And the way I use the word art is everything that is not functional. So everything you don't have to do, everything that it takes place in the area of life that you might call fictional, that doesn't have an impact that you can't escape. So a movie can have a huge impact on you, but you can always leave. A song can have a massive impact on you, but you can turn it off. So art can have a big impact, but it's not like a bomb in a sense that it's inescapable. So that's something that we say in the book is art is of no inescapable consequence. In my view, the way you describe what you said earlier was some people say, oh, I don't know anything about art. And I think it's such a shame that we created this elitist way of looking at art where people feel excluded and they feel like they have to say, oh, I don't know about this. This is not my expertise. Well,
Right.
probably they're doing art daily. Probably they're listening to music in the car.
I guess another question I have about art, do you think that intention is important in art? And what I mean by that is, do you think that there's an intention to put something out into the world that somehow enhances personal or human experience? Even if that enhancement is maybe dark. So when you talk about being creative and doing creative bookkeeping or using a creative mind in waging war, to me those are not things that enhance any real human experience, and so therefore, yes, they might be creative, but no, they're not art. And when I think of the word art, I think very broadly. I think of a huge umbrella that includes all kinds of creative things, and I think of them as the things in the world that enhance the quality of life.
Yes, especially I think your own life. When we started working on this book, Brian said that we don't know of any people who do not do art. And I thought before I write this down in a book, I need to really check this thoroughly. So I read a lot of anthropology books, I did a lot of research, and he was correct. There is a tribe who are said not to do any art, but when I read more books about them, I realized they make necklaces with beads, they do theater kind of performances with ancestors, so they do art. So Brian was right. There's no people who don't do art. And people all over the world have done art in really terrible circumstances. People
Uh-huh.
who are enslaved have done art. People in concentration camps have made poetry, made drawings, made portraits of each other. So this urge to do art is really strong. It really stops when you're actually dying, really physically dying. That seems that
Uh-huh.
that's
Uh-huh.
when we stop doing art. So it clearly has a purpose. We clearly do
Yeah.
it for a reason. And then the thing that you say is there's also this urge to share it with others, to share with others these things that we made. If you make a drawing, you want to show it. If you make a song, you might want to sing it together. And I think it's because art allows us to engage with our feelings. It's a tool to make a feeling happen and to explore that feeling. And since we are social creatures, we would love to explore that feeling together. And that's what music does so well, or a book, or any art form.
Well, what that makes me think of is how all forms of art are, in one way or another, a component of community or a bedrock of building community around that, whether it be music or visual art or whatever. That communities form around certain types of creativity. I mean, to me, these two things are innately human. I think the need to create is one of the most primally creative things about being a person, and I think community is also, and I think they're completely intertwined.
Yes, and on doing art together, for instance, singing a song together, making a beautiful meal together, setting the table, all these things that we do as a community that are art allows us to explore a feeling together. And it's
Yeah.
not rational, it's not, we don't have to fully agree with each other. For you and me to sing a song together and to share in that feeling together for a moment or listen to a song makes us equals for a moment and allows us together to connect on a level that is truly important to us and that goes beyond opinions, ideas, plans. So it is the glue of community.
Yeah,
It's the way we
exactly.
process feelings together. And if something terrible happens, you saw during COVID and lockdown, we all reached for art. We started dancing together and online things. People started doing concerts in the street. You also see it when people die. We reach for poetry and music again. When there's rallies, music is needed. So
Yeah,
we use it all the time to share feelings with each other and use it as glue for the community. So
yes.
yeah, I think I'm completely with you on this. It's the bedrock of community.
I've tried to imagine what a world would be like that didn't have art as part of it. And when I think about that, I think that that's not a world worth living in. Or similarly, if I walk in somebody's house and I see no art on the walls and I see no books in their house, to me, that's very much a red flag. Like, this is somebody, I almost had this primal thing like, I shouldn't trust this person. I don't know if that makes sense or not.
Yeah, I know. I'm familiar with that feeling. And on the flip side of this, I also find it really nice to discover people's hidden ways of doing art when they hear that I'm an artist and they say, "Oh, I don't do art. It's not my cup of tea. I don't like art. I like soccer." Yeah, I go to soccer and then we sing a song. I paint my face. And so you think, oh, you're doing a lot of art when you go to a soccer game. There's even art in soccer. But aside from that, there's a lot of singing going on and a lot of art. So I like discovering the little ways in which people do art all the time.
Or just the way people live creative lives.
Yes.
You know,
Yeah.
for me, it was very important. So I used to live in LA and then I moved to Joshua Tree for a while. And now I live in San Diego. And when I went to Joshua Tree, there was a very specific intention. That intention was I wanted to build a life that was inherently more creative. And so I designed and built this house. And then next to the house, there was this garage, and that was going to be a music and an art studio. And I wanted enough freedom in life that I wasn't saddled by the need to always be making money to have more time to create and think about creativity. That experience didn't work, but I kind of took that intention here. And I think for me right now, my creative output is basically this podcast. But my wife and I have created an environment that is very much we're surrounded by art and you can't see it behind me, but most of the walls are there's lots of color and there's art everywhere and there's books and there's music. And I love that you brought up cooking as a creative outlet as well, because I always think that cooking is art and baking is science, which is why I enjoy cooking so much more than baking, because
I'm with you.
baking has to be exact.
Yeah, there's no playfulness in baking. No, that's
No,
true.
cooking is intuition. So in
Yeah.
your case, so you are primarily a writer and also a visual artist. Do you do other kinds of art as well?
I've recently started recording my stories together with Brian onto music. Oh, you have it. Lovely. Yes. So we made the painting on that cover together, Brian and I. And I feel that using my voice in this way to music is a new art. So I have done writing, painting, all kinds of visual arts, theater, but engaging with music for me is really new. And I used to read my stories for an audience and I would read them the way people read their stories. They always say you have to project your voice. So they say, a girl was born in a village in a desert, so quite loud and quite. And when I was in the studio with Brian, he said, softer, slower. So I went softer and I went slower. And he said, even slower, more slow, even slower. And I started getting a little bit uncomfortable because as a fiction writer, you're focused on plot. You're focused on what is the next thing that happens, which is very different from music, which is way more atmosphere. So I felt very uncomfortable leaving these long silences. But once he put the headphones on with his music, I realized, the music is doing a lot of work, creating a pleasant atmosphere. And I can actually take the time to say, a girl was born while Brian's music is doing the work in the background. So for me, that was a very new experience.
I notice also that the words on the record and the words in the book are not entirely the same. That you took the story, for instance, The Other Village. I picked up the book and I opened to The Other Village and I wanted to read it while the music played. And I realized that not only was it slower and softer, but it was also kind of stripped down even more for the music, which I found interesting.
You're the first one to notice it.
Really? Well, that's great.
Yeah, thank you.
Not enough people are reading and listening to the music at the same time, I guess.
I think
Yeah.
so.
No, I noticed that. I noticed that right away. And I actually wanted to ask you about those decisions and about that process too.
Yeah, I think in the moment when I realized the listener needs a lot less information because Brian's music is so pleasant for your brain to sort of rest on, I can just say a house in a desert and I don't have to give any details because
Right.
when you rest your brain on the music, you kind of conjure up this house yourself. You create a mental picture of a house, and the music helps you get there. When you just have the blank page, you need to do a bit more work. You need to help the reader a bit more to make that picture. So it was a lovely discovery for me that Brian's music kind of ignites the imagination in that way, and I could strip down my story even more. And I'm glad you noticed.
It makes me think of when you read a book and then you watch a movie that's an adaptation of the book. The movie can never do the justice of the book. And the reason is because when you read the book, you have your imagination to go as complete and thorough and, your imagination fills in the blanks, whereas a movie tells you exactly what it is you're supposed to see. But this, being an audio recording, is kind of the opposite of that because the music almost does the same thing that a book does before it's adapted to a movie, where it creates all the space and openness for the human imagination to fill in the blanks based on their own experience, right? I think also Brian Eno's music is so perfectly suited for your collaboration and your reading your stories over his music. Do you know the word synesthesia?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
And I would like to say I have it.
Yeah, do you? I imagine you would. How does synesthesia manifest for you? I'm curious.
Days have colors, times have colors. The year is a circle and the day is a circle and emotions have colors.
Yeah,
It took
absolutely.
m-
Yeah.
it took me a while to figure out that not everybody has this, and it actually has a name. I don't know if it's a very useful skill because you cannot really communicate it with others. It sounds like almost a magical skill, a magical extra sense, but it's you cannot share it with others because if you have it
Right.
as well, you will
Hmm.
have different colors for your days. So I
Right.
cannot just send you a bunch of colors and you will know I'm talking to Bette on Wednesday because she sent me a green square.
Uh
So
huh. Yes,
in that sense, it doesn't work as a language. At the same time, I think it's probably something you find in a lot of creative people. It's something in our brain.
I think so. I mean, I don't know if I have synesthesia, but I mean, my whole background is more music than anything, but certain types of music I experience very much in terms of color and light. And I think actually Brian Eno's music is a perfect example. Like his music almost suggests color and light because it's not traditional music in the way we tend to think of pop music. I don't know if what I have is specifically synesthesia. Like I won't listen to a piece of music and say that's red or that's this kind of light, but I definitely feel what that is. I feel a certain color and a light, and it's a similar response to when I look at certain paintings in terms of the emotional feeling. So I don't know if that's synesthesia or if it's like a second cousin to it or something, but it is understanding the world of sensory input in a myriad of different kinds of ways that you can have this input and understand it in more than one way, not just as an audio thing that you hear, but as color and as light.
Yes, I don't know exactly how the neuroscientists define it and where it begins and ends, but I have this idea that some people have it to some extent. I know I talked about it with Brian and he said he didn't have it. But when we talk about music, I do say to him, can we put a little bit of pink in this one? And he does know what I'm talking about.
Okay.
Uh,
Right, right.
and when we hear a voice, I will draw a shape that I think the voice has, and he will draw the shape that the voice has in his mind. So I think whether it deserves the label or not, or whether my experience deserves that label or not, I don't know. But I do think that a lot of people have these merged sensations, as you say, in
Mm-hmm.
their brain
Mm-hmm.
where it's
Yeah.
linked. And I completely relate to your experience where the music has a color and the colors are connected to emotions as well. It's beautiful, isn't it? Also that we haven't
It's
been
incredible. Yeah, it's incredible.
yeah, and I kind of love that we haven't been able to put words on it.
I think the day I first heard that word was a really exciting day for me because I'm like, there's a word for this thing. Because I knew what the thing was, and I'm like, it might be my favorite word.
Yes.
If you're enjoying this conversation, please make sure you hit that follow button so you never miss an episode. If you're watching on YouTube, please like this video, leave a comment, and if you haven't already, please subscribe. It's the quickest way to grow our channel, and it's absolutely free. You can also subscribe to our other channels on social media. Check out our Instagram at Creative Asylum CA, that's the letter CA, or on TikTok at The Creative Asylum, that's all one word. Our website is thecapod.com, and our Facebook profile is the same, facebook.com/thecapod. All right, back to the episode. So after you did What Art Does, and that was what? That was just last year, correct?
It came out, if I remember correctly, in January last year.
Okay. And then from that came this whole Slow Stories project. And, I know it's sort of two different things, and I'll hold it up for people that watch us on YouTube, right? There's the record and there's the book. I'm wondering if one of them came first or if both of them were kind of conceived all together as part of the same thing. I'm just curious how that all came together as a set of ideas.
Well, I had been writing these stories for ages, for about 20 years, I would say. The oldest one in the book is 20 years old. And for some reason, I thought they will never be published. I thought it's hard to publish short story collections, and I thought nobody would like them. And even though I read them at readings, I didn't feel that they would ever be published. So I had a long time to just work on them, rework them without any pressure whatsoever. I told Brian about them and he said, why don't you send them to a mailing list? Why don't you just send them around and see what people think? And I started doing this, and people responded very positively. And also, they engaged with the stories by telling me how it made them feel, what they thought it was about. So it encouraged me, and my publisher immediately said, "Yes, let's publish them." So
Okay.
I was wrong in thinking that nobody would ever want to read them, but that did give me the opportunity to have them develop for 20 years without any kind of pressure. And
Uh-huh.
my publisher asked if I wanted to do a record where I read them to music. And Brian and I were doing something. We do lots of projects together just because, as we describe in what art does, art is play and it's about process. So we when we get together in the studio to work on a book, we also do other stuff like painting T-shirts or working on his lyrics or just for fun. So the day we were painting T-shirts, I told him about this record idea and he said, "Well, let's do it." And 5 minutes later, he was placing a microphone in front of my face. I was
just
browsing
just that quick. I love that.
maybe 10 minutes, but it was very fast. And I was browsing through my stories, trying to find the one that I would want to read. And then Brian said, slower, 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 slow.
Right.
And I finally slowed down to this glacier pace that he thought was slow enough. And we started putting music to it, and it went pretty fast. And we re-recorded it once, to make the voice even more monotonous. Then we did another story, and Brian had this idea to do slow stories for a long time. I think he had been annoyed with audiobooks because he felt like there was a lot of opportunity to be explored, and he likes things to slow down. So
Hmm.
my proposal gave him the opportunity to try this out. I was a bit worried about my Dutch accent, and I had a little bit of a cold, so I thought, shouldn't we hire a professional voice to do it? And he said, no, I like accents, and you don't sound like an AI. You sound like a human being.
And also, there, it's you reading your stories. I mean, it seems to me kind of like it would be strange to have somebody else read your stories.
Yes, that's true. I mean, I had been working with Brian for a long time, but I felt like entering the territory of music with him was a bit more scary than to be working on a book with him. But he made it seem so simple and playful. I just thought, if he likes it, he has good taste, then I'm sure other people will like it. So I don't think I will work as a professional voice from now on. I don't think they will hire me to read the, an anthology of poetry or something, but it works for my own stories.
Well, one of the thoughts I had, I was wondering if there have been any conversations around. So you now have two slow stories, but your book has 16 stories. So have you talked about maybe doing this again together with a couple of your stories, or you're not really thinking about that right now?
We recorded a few more, and we were trying out some stuff. So I do think there will be more. I don't know when and if and how, but we did record a few more, and they sounded really great. So hopefully.
Yeah. I mean, I think it would be great. How did the idea come together of doing this whole special package with the record and then the book and then the paintings that you work on together? So the paintings that are basically on the inside of the record, right? That's what these are.
Yeah, those are examples of the 444 paintings we made. We used this bundle with the record and artwork and the book to raise money for our charities. And we've done that before with What Art Does. We made an artist edition. We painted the sleeve of the book, and we sold them to collectors and people who like to have a unique work of art, and we raised funds for our charity. So that is really important to me. It's really important to Brian. I think applying for grants for charities is really awful, and it limits the work in a way that you cannot be creative at all anymore because you
Mhm.
have to set a goal and work towards it. Getting money from billionaires is also contaminated. So raising money through an art project is actually kind of a dream. So that's why we did it this way. We both like painting, so we calculated the number of canvases that we could lay out in Brian's studio, which was 444.
That's how you came up with the number? Was
Yes,
what
that's
would
how we
fit?
can.
Okay.
What would fit? Yes, and then we started doing it through this technique that Brian calls the field, where you place stencils and objects on the canvases. You spray paint, then you move the objects around. You use smaller objects, but you don't look at the individual paintings. You just let it emerge. And then at one point, you take the objects away. You look at what it is. You do an intervention. So it's a great way of making art, very suited to Brian's way of working because he likes creating generative processes and then
Yes.
disrupting them
Yes.
in some way. He likes emergent art. So, and then we started picking them up and saying, oh, this one is finished. I like this one, and putting them aside.
And you just knew, right? You knew and went like you'd look at it and go, that's done.
They surprised us. We thought, wow, this one is great. And so all the ones that we thought were great, we put them aside. And we did make more in the end. They weren't all fantastic. So we made about
Right.
700 to get 444
Okay.
good ones. It's a nice way of working because when you go back home and then you go back into the studio the next day, you look at them again, you think like, oh, this one is great. I didn't really see that. And it's a completely opposite mindset to the designer mindset where you think, I have a canvas and I'm going to paint a bird or a red square. It's really letting the work surprise you.
Hmm.
So that was a lot of fun, and it fits with our what art does, message, and our way of working. So we just wanted to make a bundle where people would have something unique and special that we felt made it worth what they're paying for. So that's why we did it, and we had some fun in the process as well.
How was that for you approaching art in a way that I assume was different from how you typically think about creating a piece of artwork?
I'm learning a lot from working with Brian in that sense. The way he works generatively is very interesting. Also, when we started creating music for the recorded stories, he has this piece of software where he presses shuffle, and then three of his music pieces from his archive are layered on top of each other. So, and then
Oh, wow.
yeah, and because his music leaves so much room for things to happen, there's not a lot of specific things in there. It's not a beat, not a voice. They layer really well. So it's the same way we did the paintings. We would press shuffle, we would listen, we think, oh, this is nice, but it might need some more. We'd shuffle again. And from this process, actually, I made a word shuffler for myself and see what would happen if I would shuffle my stories this way, which is completely different because stories have a linear process and they have meanings. But I actually wrote a really great story by throwing three stories into a shuffler and then taking out some sentences.
So it's sort of like an electronic William Burroughs approach a little bit.
Exactly. Yes.
That's interesting that from this process of layering music from Brian, you tried something similar with your writing. Do you think that any of that will actually result in something that gets published, or it was just kind of an experiment to see what you got out of it?
I think actually I will use it more often, and I got one good story out of it. Too late to add to the collection. And also, it's a bit strange, so it doesn't really fit in the collection. But I do think I will have a collection of emergent stories at one point because it's great to be surprised by your own words.
Yeah, I imagine. As a visual artist and then as a writer, do you feel them differently or think about them differently, or do you have any kind of preference depending on what is going on in your life, or are they just kind of part of the same world that you live inside of?
Good question. They exist on very separate planes for me. So I've always been a story maker. As since I was a child, I would make stories in my mind, especially in the evening when I thought about the day and I was confused about something or I was worried about something. I had this trick that I did where I would turn the event that occupied my mind into a story with animals. So if I had a fight with my friend, I would turn us both into squirrels. And in that way, I could feel through possible solutions, possible endings to this, maybe this argument that I had or this thing that I was frightened of. So I use it as kind of a psychological tool to get a grip on complex things in life and zoom out a bit and feel through different solutions and also feel through the other person's perspective. And I kept on doing this. So I will always be a story maker because I somehow incorporated it into my psychological survival. And sometimes the stories are interesting enough to share with others. When I was in art school, I thought I don't want to be a lonely writer hunched over at the keyboard. I want to do fun things with other people. I want to do action painting or singing. And I kept coming back to writing. But I did develop a love for painting. And when I paint, I can play music and it's much more fun for me. It's really much less heavy.
Do you play music when you write or no?
A little bit. So I listen to well, ambient music, piano music, anything that doesn't have a voice in it. It's not invasive.
Right. That makes sense.
Um, but painting, I really have fun. I can have a really fun day, and I dance, and I just go home and think, wow, that was an amazing day. Yeah. Do you have different art forms in your life that address different kind of modes of being for you?
Do I? Yeah, I think so. I mean, I listen to a lot of music. I spent 10 years playing music in bands. I haven't for a very long time, but I'm hoping to build a studio in the backyard that will be the place where this will happen and also a place where I'm hoping to create music as well. I don't read so much anymore, but I'm trying to start reading again. And to me, even reading can be a very creatively inspiring process, because it engages a part of your brain where imagination is triggered. Occasionally I do visual art, um, not a lot, but at the same time, my whole life I've always doodled and drawn things. And when I was 16, I published a comic book, a very very weird comic book with some friends of mine. I've done some paintings and stuff. Oh, and the other thing is I'm working on a book and kind of starting to dabble in another book. So I'm definitely a very creatively driven person,
Hmm.
but I have a hard time sometimes calling myself an artist, and I don't really know why. It doesn't have to be something that I sell if I'm creating something from nothing. And if I'm doing something that in my mind, in whatever small way, makes the world a better place.
Yes, I hear this a lot from my students. They say, or when people have graduated art school and I see them 4 years later and they say, I still don't call myself an artist because I did have an exhibition, but I don't sell work yet. And I always say, don't be stingy with the word. It's such a shame that we connected it to making money because it has nothing to do with it. Because that's usually where the hang up is. As soon as I make money from it, I will call myself an artist. And
Uh-huh.
history is full of examples of amazing artists who didn't make any money at all or very little. So we all know that that's not the judgment to go by. So I always say just don't be stingy with the word.
Well, like Van Gogh, right?
Yeah, yeah, he had kept having to write letters to borrow money.
Didn't Van Gogh sell one painting before he died? Total? Something like that?
I don't remember. I just remember seeing these letters where he asked people for money.
Yeah, yeah. He was very broke. He was very broke.
Yeah, it's with the capitalist system has somehow infiltrated our brain in making us think that you're an artist when you make money. Well, some people make awful, horrible things that have no creativity in them and they make money. So are they then an
That is
artist?
true. Yes, that is true.
Yeah.
They would say yes. They would say yes. But I think that just means that we need to separate the thought of an artist or being a creative person. We need to remove that from expectations, because that's what the financial success is it's an expectation, but it creates a
Yes.
limitation.
That's why I think we need to have better conversations around art. And it's something that motivated both me and Brian to write this book, What Art Does, to
Uh-huh.
say, why do we do it? What is it? So artists have a better way of defending themselves and to defending art's position in society and to have a better grasp of what it is that you're doing and why it is important. And I think one of the very difficult things if you become a musician or an artist or a writer and you start calling yourself this, you will be at some kind of party and for some reason people always want to know what your profession is, so then you say I'm an artist, and then they want to know how successful are you money wise.
Right.
So that's a very difficult moment for a lot of artists because actually having financial success is really the final hurdle and it fluctuates so much. So if the outside world measures you by this standard, you start dreading these conversations. And I used to do a job cleaning while I was an artist and I had a side job as a cleaner. I much preferred telling people at parties that I was a cleaner because then
Really.
the conversation was over. Nobody wants to know about it. So
Now do you say I'm an artist? Do you say I'm an artist, I'm a writer?
yes, absolutely. Yes.
Okay,
Yeah, because
great.
I have my answers now to these questions.
You have things you can show them. Sometimes that,
That's true.
you know,
Yeah.
I mean, you can show somebody a painting and maybe it's just sitting in
Yes.
your closet, but it is something that you created, so that makes you an artist.
Absolutely. And very often these people also do arts without knowing it. So instead of now just bragging about my accomplishments, I steer the conversation to what kind of art do you do? And because I like to hear about these things. And very often people say, well, I used to really enjoy playing the violin, but I stopped. And then you can have a nice conversation. You can actually talk about why did you stop? How did it make you feel? And then I feel like I'm glad that I talked to this person.
Yeah. Do you think that most people have a narrow definition of what being an artist means, that it has to specifically be some form of visual art as opposed to music or writing or other creative outputs? Like, do people think of dance or music or writing as being an artist? Are those separate little buckets that they put people in? Or does it matter?
Yeah, in the Netherlands, there is a specific idea about what an artist is, and it's kind of an elitist idea. So, and they don't necessarily think of musicians. And you do also very often get this idea of, oh, who do you think you are? You know, as if you're some kind of pretentious wannabe. You know, I'm an artist, I'm special. In the Netherlands, it's not a good thing to be special. We have this saying, just be normal, that's crazy enough.
How does that sound in Dutch?
Doe maar normaal, dan doe je al gek genoeg.
I know one Dutch phrase. That's it.
What is it?
It's ik hou van jou.
Lovely. That's
That's
nice.
all I know. That's all I know. But it's a good
It's
one.
a good one. And you know, actually, I was reminded the other day because I'm speaking with a lot of American interviewers, and many of them feel a little bit awful about America at this point, even apologetic sometimes. And I
Yes.
am reminded my experience with Americans in comparison to Europeans, the way I was received as an aspiring writer, as a young artist. It was so welcoming, so
Really.
open. Peop Yes, when I did my first book tour, everybody I met, from taxi drivers, bartenders, they were curious. They didn't think I was some kind of pretentious snob. They just wanted to know, oh, what's the name of your book? I might look it up. And I thought that's a really great thing about Americans, and maybe it's a good time to mention it sometimes. That
Yeah.
there's this openness, this enthusiasm, this willingness to believe that really helped my career as an artist develop and gave me the confidence that I wasn't getting in Europe. So, as we were talking about how people react when you're an artist, my personal experience in America, whether it was in the Midwest, in California, or New York, was that people were encouraging. And I thought that was just very cool to have that experience, that people were excited for me.
You don't get that in the Netherlands?
No, and Brian will say the same about the UK. There's this idea of you have to write a book and you think you're better than us. And I didn't have that experience at all in the US. So it was encouraging.
What if you're an American writer and you're traveling in the UK or in the Netherlands and you're in a cab? Do you think it would be different just because you're maybe from a different country? Do you think
No,
people are experiencing this kind of thing within their own country, and then when they go to a different country, people are treated differently?
for sure, there's an element of if you are foreign, there's always this exotic thing, and people don't recognize the things that they might find annoying about you if they recognize your specific social species. So for sure, that's part of it. But the Dutch were known for a lot of expat leave because we are so rude. And that's just who we are. And the other side of the coin is that we are quite direct, and we save a lot of time with direct honesty.
I appreciate that.
Thank you.
I never found the Dutch to be rude. The time I spent in the Netherlands, I found the Dutch people to be wonderful. But I did find that I found Germans often to be seemed very cold to me. Not necessarily rude, but just kind of emotionally cold.
They are in their culture a little bit more standoffish
Yeah,
as they appear. Yeah. And in our heart, of course, we're all the same. And
right.
um, but that's more in the culture. And in the Dutch culture, we don't necessarily like it when people are special or trying to be
Mm.
special. And the American culture, I just wanted to say this positive thing that I'm reminded of lately about my encounter with Americans across the whole country, because I think sometimes we can forget who we are as a country, and we can forget what unites us and combines us. And I've only been a visitor, but I've met people across in the countryside, in the cities, from all political backgrounds and cultural backgrounds in America. And as a visitor, I can say you are very open and welcoming and enthusiastic and willing to believe.
Well, that's
And
great.
that's yes, and it might be getting lost a little bit in all of this, but it's good to remember sometimes. As your little sister Europe giving a little message over to the big brother America.
Yeah, and
So
that's a very true
yeah,
reality. Well, we're winding down here, so I'm going to ask you a should question. How do you think art and creativity should exist within various societies, as opposed to how they actually are? What's your perfect world?
yeah, good question. I tried to banish the word should from my dictionary.
I know. Yeah,
Yeah, and I can
that's
tell you
that's
are
why
too.
that's why I used it on purpose.
Yeah, I would say at this moment in time, I think we are bombarded with media news all the time, with ads. Everything is designed to grasp our attention and to make us feel a certain way or think in a certain way that perhaps we didn't choose. And perhaps if we sit down and think, what do I really want to think about? What do I really want to feel about? It's something else entirely. So in my ideal world, as opposed to the current world, we use art. We build a lot more room for art in our lives. We use it to engage with our feelings, with who we really are. We use it to bridge differences with others that we might have different opinions with. And we use it to remind ourselves what truly goes on within us. And in that way, I do think that we would have a more pleasant world. Whatever it is that you figure out through art, I do think that if we use art and create way more time for it and make a lot less time for all these media bombardments that come at us, I think we will have a slower, kinder, more joyful, connected world. I hope so.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of The Creative Asylum. A quick favor before you go. If you liked this conversation, please be sure to follow and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. New episodes drop every Tuesday at 10. You can find us on Instagram and on YouTube at Creative Asylum CA. That's Creative Asylum and the letters CA. Our website is thecapod.com. And our Facebook is the same, facebook.com/thecapod. Until next week, when we'll have a new conversation with another creative disruptor, stay creative in life and at work.